Well, hello everyone. Hi. Oh yeah, there's a good amount of energy at the three. Let's keep that going. My name's Kiran, as Kath said. It's so good to be here. It really is a joy to share with you. Some of you might know my wife Bex. I don't know if she's around in the room. There she is. Yeah, front row. New haircut for today. No, it wasn't for today. But she's like shrinking down in her seat right now. We moved to the UK about 4.5 years ago from our hometown of Auckland, New Zealand. Yeah, we got a few Kiwis in the room. Love that. They don't usually come out at daytime. Look, when we first moved to the UK, one of the first things people would ask us is, "You all right?" Which, I still don't know the right answer to. I think it is to say, "You all right, back?" That's my British accent, by the way. The second question people would often ask us is like, why did you choose to move here from there? And I think people had seen like the pictures of beautiful New Zealand, or maybe they'd watched Lord of the Rings. It's mostly that. But the thing is, we love London. We love being here. And you won't catch me bad-mouthing Auckland. I'm not going to do that. Partly because it's my hometown, and I also think my mum's going to watch this on YouTube later, so... But we love being here, love the amount of life there is here, the diversity, the community that we've found here. It really is special. And I'm happy to say that just a couple of weeks ago, I got my visa extension approved. Come on, thank you. You had to give that reaction, didn't you? But it means that I can be here for another 2.5 years, at least. Yeah. Bex is fine, she's got a UK passport, that's quite handy. But when we decided to move here about 4.5 years ago, we just got married. We didn't really have anything planned. We didn't have jobs lined up here. We didn't have a longer-term place to stay. So we just decided to come here. And really, apart from a few close friends that we'd known before, they'd sort of convinced us to come over too, we were starting from scratch when it came to community. We'd stepped out of the places that were really known and familiar to us, so it felt like, okay, we're building something from the ground up. I know that for many of you in the room that experience will be familiar as well. You might have had a similar thing of moving into London, and even if you've grown up here or been in London for a long time, you might identify with that challenge of having to build community in a place that can be really fast-paced. That's what we're going to look at today. So we are in the series, Awakening the City, and we are looking at this incredible place that we live, looking at the culture around us here in London and asking, God, what is your vision for bringing renewal here? And we've been anchoring this in a different city each week from the Bible and looking at how God engages with them to give us a vision of what does God want to do here? What would he love to see? And we've been focusing on these significant cultural shifts and in the context of city life. And this week, we're going to look at the shift from individualism to community. What does it mean for the city to be a place of real community? Now, you might hear that and think, okay, I get the gist. Individualism bad, community good. But I just want to jump in right here from the top and say that this isn't just about grasping a concept. This is about the people that we are and the people that we're becoming together. And this is an ongoing work. It's never really done. So can I just invite you to lean in? And I really believe that the Spirit was going to speak stuff for us all today. It's important to start. We want to recognize that individualism, it is the cultural sea that we swim in. The message of individualism is essentially, the world is about me. It revolves around my happiness, my joy, my well-being, my success. And in the West, it totally pervades our way of thinking and our way of viewing the world because we're surrounded by it. You do you, believe in yourself, live your truth. All of these modern mantras, that we see them all across social media and hear them from well-meaning friends. Hyper-individualism is all around us. It isn't a new thing either, and it's not a new observation. You're probably used to hearing about it. But the fact that this is our setting, this is our context, it makes it really hard to recognize when we've started to drift in that direction. It makes it quite hard to spot when it seeps into who we are or how we see others. And, on the surface, it sounds like a good thing. Empowerment, independence, my way, my rights, my power. The idea is that you'll find your identity by looking within yourself. But the problem with that is that it puts a burden on the self that it was never meant to carry. It corrodes relationships. And in an age where we're more connected than ever, we're finding that we can't survive on a diet of shallow relationships. Connectivity does not equal community. And behind all this, we're seeing this epidemic of loneliness as well. 6 years ago, Britain was the first country to launch a national loneliness strategy, which involved appointing a loneliness minister, and there's been several since. There was a report commissioned by the Greater London Authority in 2022 that found that 1 in 12 Londoners are severely lonely. When you look around a room like this, you're like, okay, that's quite a few people. Londoners, this is what the report said, Londoners are more likely than others in the UK to be affected by severe forms of loneliness. 700,000 of them feel lonely most or all of the time. And the pandemic is very likely to have exacerbated this further. So that's talking about severe loneliness, which they define in their own way. Read the report if you like. But I'd be willing to bet that all of us have some experience of what this is talking about, of yearning to be known and to know others, to give and receive love. And this sort of bizarre combo that comes with it, where it's like the thing that we really crave, but we're also terrified of that level of vulnerability too. So this is the context that we have to speak into, to show a different way of living, to tell a different story. So we're going to have a look at that today, and what the Bible offers is a different vision of what thriving could look like. So we're going to take a look at the city of Ephesus in the Bible. Ephesus, snazzy little picture there, located in modern-day Turkey, and it looks a little bit like this now, like some stones stacked up. Looks pretty cool. But at the time, it was this huge, dynamic, diverse, bustling city. I found this little drawing of it, and big amphitheater there. There was lots going on. It was this place of crossroads between Europe and what we'd call East Asia now. It was massive, and at the time, it was one of the top cities in the Greco-Roman Empire. So you have this hive of activity where people from all over the world would gather, and it would be like worlds colliding, and not just their personal stories, but their worldviews as well. You could find every kind of practice. You could find every kind of worldview. It would have been a place where it was easy to get lost in the crowd. And there was also this shadow side of corruption, of pleasure-seeking and idol worship as well. At the center of Ephesus was their love of the goddess Artemis, or also known as Diana to the Romans. She was supposed to represent fertility, and people would regularly make offerings and sacrifices and engage in idol worship at the temple. So you've got this huge, incredibly diverse city with an equally massive mixture of cultures and practices. Is it starting to sound familiar at all? This was the context of the letter to the Ephesians that was written by the Apostle Paul. And he had planted a church about 10 years before that letter was written, and he wrote it from prison in Rome. This is an incredible book of the Bible. If you've ever spent any time with it, you'll know that it's so rich that every line you could sort of pull out and study for a long time. And actually, that's what we did last summer. We had a series called Ephesians, creatively, that is very worth checking out. It's on the website. You can go back and listen to it. But Paul, in this book, is writing this encouragement to the church. So they're in early stages. They're sort of scattered throughout this city. And they're trying to figure out, what does it look like to be the church that they're called to be? So that's where we're going to jump into Scripture. So we're going to go to Ephesians chapter 4, verse 1. If you've got your physical Bible here or a phone, then now's the time. Otherwise, it'll come up on the screen. And we're going to jump in. It says, "As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you've received." And sorry, we're just going to pause on that part because this is actually this pivot point of this letter. For 3 chapters, Paul has been unfolding this grand message about Jesus, that through his death and resurrection, that everything's changed, that all of humanity has this way to come to new life. He's giving this massive vision of good news that stretches across all time. And that's where we come into this chapter, where we have this word then in the NIV, which is this translation. Lots of other literal translations, they have the word therefore. And it's sort of like this fulcrum point where all of that, those first 3 chapters, because of all of this good news, in light of that, this is how you should live. There's this call to live like Jesus, to tell his story through the way that the church lives. And in the parts that follow, we're going to see a few different elements of this calling. Let's carry on to verse 2. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. It's a pretty emphatic call to unity. There's these 7 ones. He really hammers the point home. One body, one Spirit, one hope. There's a call to be united in the way that God is in Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. In this hectic city of Ephesus, where you could sort of pursue any sort of individual expression that you wanted, full of the weird and the wonderful, Paul is saying to the church, keep the unity that you've found in Jesus. It's got to center on him. Don't split off, don't form your little factions, work at staying together. And you do this by being humble, gentle, patient, and bearing with one another. Let's jump to verse 11. So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors and teachers to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. So we have this call to unity. We also have this call to diversity. And, just to pause there and think about individualism as, at its core, being a desire for control, right? It's a desire for self-reliance. And what Paul writes to the church in Ephesus is that no one can do this alone. In a God-shaped community, self-reliance can't exist. Instead, it looks like each one playing their part in a whole. He's saying that unity doesn't equal uniformity. It doesn't mean a flattening of our personalities, our giftings, our uniqueness. Instead, it's put into right context, not as us as the main character, but part of a more vibrant whole. Okay, we'll jump ahead to verse 25. We're sort of rattling through this chapter. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. Anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their own hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you are sealed for the day of redemption. Get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Doing okay? There's a lot in there, but it's so good. There's this call to build others up. And Paul is writing to the Ephesians saying that if you want to be distinctive in this place, you're going to have to let go of some of the things that have become habits and pick up some new ones. Letting go of anger, of talk that brings people down, of bitterness, and picking up kindness and compassion and forgiveness. I just want us to pause quickly to say that, when we read the scriptures, a lot of the time we encounter these areas of sort of gray or where there's difficult areas to interpret. But this isn't one of them. The Bible's actually really clear about talk that tears down other people. It has no place. It has no place here. And I wanted to highlight that because, you might relate to that fleeting moment of power or the thrill that comes from sharing gossip about people. But it so badly undermines the community that God has called us to. And it's up to us to do the hard thing and say, I'm not going to participate in that. In that moment to say, I could, but I won't. One of my close friends who has come to faith, I met him before he was a Christian, and the way that he came to faith was actually just by meeting a group of our friends. We went away on holiday together, and just by being part of that, he was interested in what we were interested in, decided to come along to church, met Jesus. It's such a joy to see that for a friend. But he said this, that I've never been in an environment where people aren't trying to cut each other down and where people give encouragement without it being a joke. It's the simple things can really, I know it says something about our culture, but the simple things can really be transformative for the people around us. Okay, so we see this calling to unity, diversity, and to build others up. That's the call for Ephesus, for the church there, and I believe that's the same call for us in London. There's this phrase in verse 3 that we read earlier about keeping unity, and it says, make every effort. And I love that it's included there because it acknowledges that this sort of community, it doesn't just happen, that it actually takes intentional steps, and it requires us to work at it. So I want to share a few of the steps that we can take. I was going to say, if that's okay, but it's happening. Here we go. So the first is, keep a generous heart. This is what Henri Nouwen said. Community is first of all a quality of the heart. It grows from the spiritual knowledge that we are alive not for ourselves, but for one another. Community is the fruit of our capacity to make the interests of others more important than our own. The question, therefore, is not how can we make community, but how can we develop and nurture giving hearts? This transformation, it starts from the heart. I said earlier, individualism, it makes our whole world about us. It's my joy, my well-being, my fulfillment. And this is what St. Augustine and other theologians throughout history have described as a life curved in on itself. And that's sort of the crux of what sinful nature is. It's this everything being turned towards the self. And it goes hand in hand with consumerism. Because then every interaction, every relationship, it becomes about trying to extract something from it. So, it's not a recipe for living well. I think that's clear. But when it seeps into our things of faith, it can be disastrous. We can become so fixated on how others should be serving us that it stops us from ever experiencing the gifts of genuine community. So we build Jesus-centered community by making generosity our default. It's put really simply in 1 John 3:16. It says, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. So for us, what can I give always comes before what can I get. We saw really vivid examples of this when we had the COVID lockdowns, if you can cast your mind back to then. While some people were hoarding loo rolls, other people saw it as an opportunity to reach out and bless others. And I think of the one of the first times we got COVID at a time when it meant you had to stay at home. And we had people from our hub come and drop us meals and have conversations from quite an unusual distance. It seemed normal at the time. It was all legit. We were social distancing. But it really was a practical example. You could see there's two ways of handling quite a bizarre situation. You could either turn it in on yourself, I'm going to get the things that I need and make sure that I hoard it, or look outwards to how we could bless others. And so when we had other people in our hub in the same situation or others that we knew, it was natural for us to respond in the same way. Just this, actually, I think in the last couple of weeks, there's been a blog that went up on the KXC website. I don't know if you saw it. It was about some people from KXC who have this community house in central London. And they've intentionally chosen, I think we've got a little picture of them. There you go, from the vlog. You might recognize some of them. I don't know if they're here today. But they've intentionally chosen to keep a spare room to host people who need a place to stay. And they've had people from all different kind of walks of life to come stay with them, joining in their rhythms of like shared meals and the way that they care for one another. And I really love that. I love that as an example of opening up your life and the place that you have in generosity to others. And while keeping a generous heart, it absolutely includes sharing our material things. It's not just limited to that. So generosity in this moment, it might look like listening, like really listening to someone who needs to be heard and seen and known. It might mean opening up beyond that sort of standard, how you doing? Fine. Or you're right. It might look like sending someone a follow-up message if you haven't seen them for a while, just saying, hey, been thinking of you, how you doing? It might be physically showing up to be with someone who's going through a tough time, or offering to pray for someone right in the moment when they share stuff. And living with a generous heart, it can start simply just by opening up our lives, by being open-handed with the things that we have and the things that where we already are. One of the simplest and most effective ways we can do this is through food. Any fans of food here? Yeah. Yeah. Some loud cheers from the front. I think there's something unique about the way that food brings people together. And Jesus spent a lot of time eating with people. And that's what a lot of our hubs do as well. Every week when we gather like this on a Sunday, there's an opportunity to who's around you right now that you could grab lunch with or invite to your place. It's this opening and sharing of our lives that builds connections. There's loads of ways we could do this. Playing board games, that's personal favorite. Going for a walk with people, striking up a conversation with the people that you cross paths with regularly. But we build Jesus-centered community by making generosity our default. It starts with our hearts. Okay, let's keep moving. Number 2, we've got to embrace the messy reality. So I am a guitarist, I will admit. Guitarists are sort of a weird bunch. They're partly like rock and roll, but also quite nerdy. And if you know a guitarist, you'll know. And the guitar community talks about this thing called GAS, G-A-S. I've got gas. Most guitarists have gas. And GAS stands for Gear Acquisition Syndrome. And it's basically this thing that you always need one more piece of gear or equipment, musical equipment. You're never happy with what you've got. It's just like, if I just had that pedal, then I'll have the tone that I need and I'll be fine. Just one more guitar, that'll be it. And it's never just one more. If you've got any sort of hobby where it's like quite tinkery, you can buy bits of equipment, then you'll probably relate to that. And it's actually really easy to have this mindset with community that if I just find the right group of people, then things would be easy. If I joined a better church, then I wouldn't have the problems that I'm experiencing right now. If I found a best mate that was just like me, then I'd finally be fully understood. And here's the thing, that real community, it means being with real people, along with their imperfections. Jesus' disciples, the ones that he handpicked to be his closest companions, they were a ragtag bunch. They were argumentative and doubtful. They had angry flare-ups. They were violent at times. They were wildly different to each other. And yet this was the group that Jesus decided to roll with. And they eventually were shaped in his love, and from that came the early church and all the way through to today. If it's good enough for Jesus, it should be good enough for us. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who's the hugely influential German pastor and theologian, wrote about this at length. And his book, Life Together, it's full of the type of truth, the ones that just like punch you in the gut. And I want to share a quote that is one of these sorts of truths. It's heavy, but it rings incredibly true. And you might have heard this before, but I think it's worth sharing. Every human wish dream that is injected into the Christian community is a hindrance to genuine community and must be banished if genuine community is to survive. Those who love their dream of a Christian community more than they love the Christian community itself become destroyers of that Christian community, even though their personal intentions may be ever so honest, earnest, and sacrificial. God hates this wishful dreaming because it makes the dreamer proud and pretentious. Those who dream of this idolized community demand that it be fulfilled by God, by others, and by themselves. They enter the community of Christians with their demands set up by their own law and judge one another and God accordingly. Whew, it's pretty heavy. But I think it rings true. We only experience true community if we're willing to embrace the messiness of doing life with real people. John Mark Comer, who's an author and pastor as well, he put it this way. We need to forgive each other for not being God, which I think is a pretty concise way to put it well. Let's let go of these wish dreams of people who are just like us, or that will fulfill all of our unmet needs, or will laugh at all of our jokes. That's particularly close to home for me. There just isn't a group of humans that will meet all of our expectations. So we better learn to love the ones we're with. And that means the people who think differently to you, the ones who might make awkward comments, or don't take your shoes off in your house, or insist that you do take your shoes off in their house, whatever side of that argument you fall on. We can only live up to this call of unity and diversity if we embrace the messiness of real community with real people. And so the best place to start is with the people who are right in front of you. Start where you are and with the people around you. There's this, it reminds me of another story, actually from COVID times as well. I've shared this at the 12 p.m. service before, but this was in times of like quite heavy lockdowns, and there was basically our fence at the place we were renting was wrecked, needed fixing. Out of boredom, I decided to pull the whole fence down and try and build a new one. And so when we pulled that fence down, we could suddenly see into our neighbor's yard, and there they were. And we struck up a conversation, and over days and weeks became friends with them. And we sort of discovered, we've had these people here the whole time. And it was this really special friendship for that period of time. And actually, when the fence was put back, we sort of like left a gap in there to be able to like keep chatting and have a little Aperol spritz through the window. This comes to mind because it's just like a picture of living in a way without fences around us. You know, we do in a lot of ways either put up barriers between people to try and protect ourselves, or to just live our lives in an individual way. But one of the ways we can embrace the messiness is by taking our fences down. And this is the sort of environment that allows vulnerability. It allows us to be real about our weaknesses, our struggles, and our need for each other. And this is where we can rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. You know, I spoke before about keeping a generous heart and acts of generosity. And I want to recognize that there are actually two sides to that equation, to that kind of care, that there's giving and receiving. And so for some of you, you're in a spot where you really need support. You know, today, that's your reality coming to church. Or you might not be in a position where you can give. And I never want to advocate for burnout or running yourself into the ground. Your part to play in this season might be to be real, to offer vulnerability and let the fences come down. And let me say this, that as a community, that's what we're here for. Don't rob people of the opportunity to support you through life's tough stuff. Okay, so let's not let an illusion of connectivity get in the way of the real, deep, messy community we're called to. All right, and lastly, we want to play the long game. This is the context where relationships thrive. When you look around us at like the hookup culture of dating apps, with disposable relationships, it's absolutely corrosive to the human soul. The surface level or performance-based relationships, it just fills people with shame and drives them to hide away. And if we contrast that to marriage, where it's a promise to stay whatever happens, you know, it doesn't always live up to that promise, but there's that promise, that's the context where a relationship can thrive. Joseph Hellerman wrote it this way: spiritual formation occurs primarily in the context of community. Long-term relationships are the crucible of genuine progress in the Christian life. People who stay grow. And what this means is that we need to learn how to do the hard work of reconciling and dealing with our stuff. It's heartbreaking to me to see people bail out of friendships and bail out of relationship when tough stuff comes along. Because when people seal themselves off because of hurt, it's so tragic because it prolongs that hurt. You stay there. And I want to say that, sometimes it is right in toxic or harmful or abusive relationships to remove yourself from that. But in a lot of cases, my encouragement to you would be, if there's an opportunity to reconcile and make things right, then don't bail out. I was part of a small group when I was part of a youth group, and it was probably in my teens, and there was a few of us who led this group, and we thought it was going well. There were 3 of us who ran it, and then one day a few of our friends pulled us aside and said, look, I don't know if you're aware, but there's 3 of you who love to get into the debate, and you're the ones who do all the talking, and everyone else is sitting and watching. And I'm ashamed to say as well that there was 3 of us who were men, and we were dominating that space. Some of you might not be surprised. So these friends who confronted us on this, for me, it was such a direct challenge that I was so grateful for, because it gave us the opportunity, firstly, to apologize for that. Secondly, to do something about it. We changed who was leading that group so that it was, more diverse. And we made sure not to dominate that space that we had as well. And if they had just decided to bail out or just to step away, we wouldn't have had that opportunity to grow. And this happens time and time again. Community is the context where we're transformed, we're healed, and we grow. There's something to be gained by playing the long game. And London, it's often described as a transient place. And it is true that we say more than our fair share of, hellos and goodbyes. But I just want to affirm that some of us here will be called to stay put. And others will be called to stay here for a season and then go. But I think our call is this, that wherever you are, to be fully there. Do I need to come into land now? I'm looking at the time. Yeah. That's probably not a question you ask over the microphone, right? Yeah. Just let us know in the chat on the live screen. Okay, I'll just share this one last story, which is actually from my in-laws who were moving to the States, and they were going there to be part of this church, and they'd moved their lives there, and they went to church and were talking with someone from that church. And as they got chatting, it came to light that they'd just moved there. And this person essentially said to them, it's good to meet you. Just to let you know that I know that because you've just moved here, it's not worth me investing in this friendship, because I know that one day you're just going to leave. So we're not going to be friends. Which is just brutal. Like, sometimes you might have thought that before, but you wouldn't say it out loud. But what a horrific view for people who are spending a season of their life there. And actually what happened was with other people who took the opposite view to say, while you're here, we are going to invest in this. We're going to say, we are fully present here with you, and let's make this season count. And those friends have actually lasted with them for 30 years. And they were just in New Zealand visiting now. I think playing the long game, it doesn't mean being stingy with your love or with your attention. It means that wherever you are, you invest yourself fully. It should be costly when we leave. When we say goodbyes, it should be hard, because we've brought so much of who we are and ourselves to that community. So we'll land there, play for the long game, and be fully present. Just to recap, we have this call to unity, to diversity, and building others up. And we can do this by keeping a generous heart, embracing the messy reality of community, and playing the long game. And if we live in this kind of community, as we're called to be, I really believe that it can transform our city. It happens in stories of just ones or twos, in the small stuff, in stories of specific people. But this sort of community centered on Jesus, it it always flows out. It always is aimed at those outside of the building. Our call is to come back to God and engage with Him in this sort of community. It is a gift. And if we're going to be faithful to our calling, we have to live in this way. We need to respond to Jesus in this way. Why don't we stand? I know we've run a little bit long, but we want to make space to respond, and we want to make space to pray. So I'd love to just invite the Holy Spirit. And why don't we just be still for a moment? Lord, would you come? We thank you for your presence here. Would you speak to us, Lord, for the sake of your people, for the sake of London, for the sake of the world? Would you fill our hearts with your vision, your passion for people, Lord, and your version of community? And there's a few groups of people that I just love to pray for specifically. And one of them is if you've been yearning for this kind of community, you're hearing this like, I've sort of given up hope on that happening for me here in London. We would love to pray for that, for breakthrough, for a refreshing of hope, and for that heart of generosity to come and fill you. I'd also like to pray for anyone here who is feeling that call to carry a place of belonging and home into the city, into places where people who might have never experienced that before, where they are. So we'd love to pray into that and bless that too. And we'd love to also pray if there's anyone who's carrying sort of hurt or disappointment from what's happened in a church setting, or maybe with people who you trusted, that feels like one of those fences has gone up. We'd love to pray into that because we just have seen that God can release those things. He wants to.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah, just off the back of that, I just was reminded of that bit in Ephesians where it says to get rid of all bitterness. And I just think, and the antidote to that is forgiveness. That's not saying that the things that were said or the way you were even betrayed does not matter, but it is actually about bringing that to the cross and saying, I'm not going to hold on to that judgment anymore. I'm going to release that person from my judgment. And so it may be that you need to take the first steps towards forgiving. And that's going to bring freedom and healing, even within this community. It might even be where you felt let down in this community. Jesus wants to meet you with his grace, invite you into forgiveness. So before we invite people, we are going to invite people forward, but we're going to say goodbye to you if you're on the live stream. Bless you. See you next week, just so we can create some safety here for those coming forward for prayer.